Well, I want to thank you for joining the first VMware TAM customer webinar of 2025. This webinar is organized by the VMware TAM community with the goal of putting great speakers in front of you that will then help you get the most benefit from your VMware by Broadcom software investment. Before we get into today's content, just a couple of basic announcements. First, our next TAM customer webinar will be on February 6th, and we'll have the privilege of being joined by Chris Grice to talk about the various roles that VMware Avi Load Balancer can play in your organization. Your interaction during this webinar is important, so please make use of the Q&A feature of Zoom to ask your questions. If for some reason we're unable to answer your question during this webinar, be sure to reach out to your TAM and ask them to follow up. At the end of today's session, you will be prompted to fill out a simple 2-question survey related to the value you receive from this session and any topic suggestions for future sessions. Your completion of this survey is a very valuable gift back to us. We'd greatly appreciate you filling it out. Lastly, this webinar is being recorded, and your TAM can make the recording link available to you. And then after a few months, the recording will be publicly available on the VMware TAM Services YouTube channel. So that brings us to today's speaker and topic. We've got a team of people helping us today. Thomas Sauerer is a VMware staff cloud solution architect, but is a bit under the weather today, so he will mostly be in the background answering your questions. Thankfully, the bench is deep, and we appreciate Cormac Hogan jumping in at the last minute to deliver this webinar. So Cormac, over to you.
Thank you, Andy, and Happy New Year, everybody. So yes, today's topic is Data Services Manager. You may or may not have heard about this product or feature in the past, but it's been around for about a year now. And the objective today is purely educational, just to let you know all about Data Services Manager and what it can do for you. So without further ado, let's get into the agenda. So there is a slight disclaimer here to begin with. This is lifted directly from Explore. I am going to be talking about a few things that are future looking, which may or may not happen, like all of these things. Hopefully they will happen. But yeah, just to put the standard disclaimer in there, not to base any purchasing decisions on what you see, especially around the futures bit, because it all is subject to change. So I do want to start with why we came up with Data Services Manager in the first place. What are the challenges we heard from our customer base, and why did we go ahead and build such a product? And then we'll talk about some of the data services announcements that we made at Explore in Barcelona just last November. And this is sort of some of the future-looking plans I was talking about. We'll get into the nitty-gritty details, the architecture, how the whole thing ties together, how it works, and really, we're going to spend a lot of time on discussing these 3 different personas and the benefits of data services for these 3 different personas. In particular, vSphere admins, VI admins, or the IT team, but also the data admins, because essentially data services today is focusing predominantly on databases. So your DBAs, what do they get out of this? And then last but not least, your consumers. We're calling these the application teams, but could be your developers, your consumers, whoever's going to consume the databases and data services. And then we'll finish off with some next steps on what you can do. I'll include some of the more, I suppose, the closer features that we have that are close to being released in the next steps as well. So yeah, you'll see as we go through. So this is really the whole challenges around data management or database management, data services management that we hear from our customers. And this is the reasoning behind why we've created such a product in the first place. So we'll start on the right-hand side. I think most of us can relate to that, the infrastructure team, or in our case, the vSphere admins. And in particular, there was 2 things that we heard. First is that they wanted to have guardrails around the resources that are being consumed by these databases, data services that are popping up on their vSphere infrastructure. So they wanted to be able to guardrail the resources. They wanted to be able to define which vSphere clusters, which resource pools, which data stores, which networks these data services are appearing on. The second thing is visibility. So what we've heard is that, we have environments where there's a lot of developers, some DBAs, but we're seeing these virtual machines coming and going, and we don't really know what they are. So we wanted to give this visibility into whether these virtual machines that are appearing in the infrastructure, what are they running? What databases are they running? What versions of databases are they running? Are they a primary node? Are they a replica node? We wanted to give all those insights to the IT team, the vSphere admins. So it's essentially twofold. We wanted a product that would allow these IT admins to guardrail their vSphere resources while also providing visibility. So on the left-hand side, then we have the apps team, the consumers of these data services. And what we heard loud and clear is that they didn't want to be sitting there waiting for tickets to be addressed, waiting for a database to be spun up so they could use it and get on with whatever development they're doing. And in many cases, we hear of the application teams opening a ticket, this going to the data team trying to prioritize it, and it may take hours or even days to get to that particular request. And then the data team themselves have to go to the IT team and request a virtual machine in order to be able to create this database. So what was happening in that case? A lot of frustration with the end users and the application team with this long delay in getting access to a database or data service, so much so that they were building their own silos to roll out their own databases and data services. And that gives another set of headaches for the IT team, because now you don't know where these images that are being consumed or being used for provisioning databases, data services on vSphere infrastructure are coming from, leads to all sorts of compliance and security concerns. So we wanted to address that. We wanted to make the application team really agile, and maybe with the click of a button in a UI or a simple API call, they were able to get their database and data service stood up. So last but not least, in the middle here, you have the database team or the DBA or the data team, those people who are responsible for the databases and data services. Now, in many organizations, this team is pretty much tied up um, with the traditional commercial type databases, the Oracles, and so on. And now when you have an app team that are coming along looking for new cloud native modern type databases, they really don't have the bandwidth to do due diligence on a lot of these databases. They're not in a position to be able to do patching of these databases, the management of these databases, the backups of these databases, and so on. And in many cases, they just push back on the apps team and say, no, you're not allowed to provision these databases on the infrastructure. So what if we could provide a way for the DBA team to avoid having to deal with all of these tedious tasks around the new modern databases, the fleet management, the patching, the backups, and so on. That is the final aspect that we have for Data Services Manager. We wanted to alleviate all of those tedious tasks from the data team and take care of it for them. So hopefully that's given you a big picture overview of the reasons why we invested in a product like DSM, Data Services Manager. Cool. So let's get into a little bit more detail. I'm going to start with the announcement that we had at Explore in Barcelona last November. For the last year or so, we have been supporting Postgres and MySQL, but what was announced at Explore in Barcelona is that we're going to extend these data services offering to include RabbitMQ, the messaging service, and Valkey, which is essentially the open source version of Redis, if you're familiar with the Redis product. Now, to be clear, the Postgres and MySQL are deeply embedded into Data Services Manager. The RabbitMQ and the Valkey are futures. So these are things that we'll be looking at in 2025. So that was the main announcement around what we're planning to do with data services going forward. Having said that, and this is just an overview of where we are, on the far right-hand side here, with our next release, which is imminent, of Data Services Manager, we are also going to support object storage. So partnering with MinIO, we will be delivering an object store solution embedded into Data Services Manager so that you will be able to do Postgres, MySQL, and MinIO going forward. And the RabbitMQ and Valkey/Redis solutions, they will be integrated at a future point. So that's where we're going. Let's say Postgres, MySQL, we have those today. We support various versions of those. We support them standalone as well as clustered mode. And by clustering, I mean that you would have replica copies of the database placed on different hypervisors or different ESXi hosts in your cluster. And that just provides another level of availability, of course. And then I'll talk about all of those features like the fleet management of Postgres and MySQL, the backups, the patching, and all of that that we have in the product today. As I say, our plans are around Rabbit, MQ, Valkey, and partnering with MinIO as well to deliver object store. Cool. So how does it all work? So essentially, hopefully everyone is kind of familiar with what's at the bottom of the page here, or bottom of the screen. This is my attempt at drawing a VCF type environment, but essentially we have storage, we have ESXi hosts that are clustered in some way, and we have a vCenter server managing all of that. So what the VI admin does is they downloads a plugin, Data Services Manager plugin, and attaches it to the vCenter server. What that does then is it rolls out a single appliance. This is our DSM Manager Provider appliance. And once that is integrated, it extends the vSphere client to give a number of tasks or operations around data services. One of the main tasks for the VI admin is to construct this guardrail construct that I mentioned previously. And this is defined as an infrastructure policy. So within this infrastructure policy, we define the compute, the storage, the networking, and a bunch of other things to say these are the resources that I'm allowing you to use for the provisioning of data services. So the idea is that it should prevent situations where end users are provisioning databases, data services over and over again, consuming huge amount of resources, maybe consuming all the resources on a hypervisor, maybe filling up a data store. You get the idea. So the idea is that we would have these guardrails in place to prevent some of that type of thing from happening. So once the infrastructure policy is deployed, we then have the DSM manager available to the DBAs. And there is both a UI portal, but also an API as well. So depending on how the data team wants to provision databases, they can do it through the UI or they can do it through the API. And what happens then if there's a request to provision a database? What we do is we stand up a Kubernetes cluster as a set of VMs. We install what's called an operator for the database in question. In this particular example, it's Postgres. And then we roll out all of the necessary components to stand up that database. So the one thing I want to be perfectly clear on is that there's no onus on you as a customer to stand up any sort of Kubernetes. It is simply an implementation detail on how we're doing the databases with the Data Services Manager. So we are taking care of the provisioning of those Kubernetes clusters, the installation of the database, the provisioning of the database. So I just want to make that clear. And as for the management, the patching of that Kubernetes cluster, that is VMware's responsibility as well. We're not expecting you to have to do anything with that Kubernetes cluster. We will take care of that. We will provide the appropriate patches and so on as necessary. And so then once that database is stood up, the application team can come along. We can give them the connection string, or the data team can give them the connection string to the database, and they just use the database as they would any other normal database. So that's one approach, and you might consider this the original kind of ticket-based approach, where the app team opens a ticket, the data team responds to that ticket and provisions a database, and then passes the app team back a connection to that particular database. There is, of course, another self-service mechanism associated with all of this. The infrastructure admin still takes care of setting up the guardrails, the infrastructure policy. But now it might be that the data team, in the knowledge that there are certain things in place, such as patching, such as automated backups of databases, they may feel comfortable with giving the end users or the applications team access to DSM directly to provision their own databases. And we can absolutely accommodate that as well. So both approaches, we have customers going either way. Again, data team taking care of everything and just handing off connection strings to the app team, or the app team doing their own self-service. And both work. All right. Now, there's lots of ways that you can integrate with Data Services Manager. I just showed you the UI and perhaps the API. We'll come back to the API there later on as well. But if you're a user of Aria Automation, we have a custom resource that allows you to connect DSM to your Aria Automation. So you can decide, particular tenants can get access and provision databases on DSM if you so wish. Similar with the cloud consumption interface. I'm not sure if there's many of you using the supervisor clusters that we have today. The supervisor clusters has this common cloud consumption interface that is essentially part of Aria automation, but allows you to manage lots and lots of supervisor clusters simultaneously. There is an extension for that where you can provision databases through the cloud consumption interface. There's also integration with Cloud Director as well for any of you who might be CSPs out there. As I said, most of our customers today are going through the UI, through the Kubernetes API that we have, or Aria automation is also quite popular. So let's discuss these VI admin benefits in a little bit more detail. Like I said, they're twofold. One is the guardrails concept of an infrastructure policy, and the second is just visibility into what is being provisioned. So again, to resource controls, and I'm going to go through this creation of an infrastructure policy. I actually have a demo on how to do this very shortly. But the idea is that you can define which compute, which storage, which networking is going to be consumed as part of your overall vSphere infrastructure for the provisioning of these data services. And you're not just going to see stuff popping up all over your vSphere infrastructure. You actually can define where the databases and data services are going to be provisioned. The second aspect to all of that is the detailed monitoring. So we're giving customers views into the virtual machines that are being used for provisioning these databases. So you'll see what VMs are being used for databases and data services. You'll see whether it's a primary node in a database, it's a replica node, a secondary node, all of that good stuff. And also we're giving you some database level metrics bubbled up in the vSphere client as well, as you can see there on the right-hand side. And on top of all of that, there is integration with the fuller Aria suite. So Aria automation, like I mentioned, we have a custom resource. There's Aria operations. There's new plugins. I shouldn't use the word plugins. I forget what the actual term is, but there's extensions there for MySQL, for Postgres, and you can get some really good visibility into metrics there as well. And last but not least, Aria operations for logs, formerly Log Insight. We have full integration with that. It's just a matter of pointing your data services manager straight to your Log Insight. And not only do we ship the logs from the provider appliance that we roll out, but also the databases are shipping logs to Log Insight as well, if that's configured. So a good number of benefits here for the VI admin. Good. And so this is just an example of the policy that we might create, the infrastructure policy. There's just some generic information at the top, but you would select which compute resources here. In this case, it could be a full vSphere cluster, but it could also be a resource pool. You would define which folder the virtual machines that are being created to back the databases, where they are being placed, selecting a storage policy. In this particular case, yes, it's a vSAN storage policy, but there's nothing to stop you using type-based storage policies or anything like that. So the full range of vSphere storages, whether it's VMFS, NFS, vVols, or vSAN, all supported. We then would select a port group. It needs to be a distributed port group, so you would need to have a distributed switch in your infrastructure in order to be able to consume this. And it also works with NSX, by the way. And then what we do is we create a range of IP addresses that are consumed by the databases and data services as they're plumbed up. So we have this concept of an IP pool. Simply tell it, here's a range of IPs from a starting address to an ending address. CIDR format, subnet mask, all of that goes into the IP pool. And then what we do is we just pick out of that IP pool for plumbing up the databases and data services. And last but not least, we have this construct called a VM class, because typically if you just give people a bunch of vSphere resources, they're always going to build the biggest thing they possibly can, even though they may not need it. So to avoid the situation of stranded resources within VMs, what we're allowing the VI admins to do is build this construct called a VM class. So the VM class would define the amount of compute and memory that's actually assigned to a VM. And then the consumers, the end users of this infrastructure policy can only build virtual machines that match the size of the VM classes. So again, it's more granular control that we're giving to the VI admins to prevent this stranding of resources and consumers building the biggest thing they possibly can. So hopefully that's all making sense so far. Now, a little bit more about the detailed monitoring. Again, there's views I'm showing you here appear both in the DSM portal and in the vSphere client. So in fact, the DBA and the VI admin can actually get the same view of database nodes, virtual machines, versioning numbers, so what version of Postgres, for example, in this particular case is being used, what policy is being used, what storage policy, what VM class, all of that information is bubbled up both into the portal for DSM and the vSphere client. And if I drill down into, and again, this is, as I said, in the vSphere client, you have this view of all of the databases that have been provisioned through DSM available in the vSphere client, and you can drill down into these databases as well, and you can actually see what the VM name is, what role it has, and how much of your vSphere resources have been consumed by this particular node. So really good information available here. So let's have a look at our first demo. And this is the infrastructure policy creation. I'm going to show you this plugin that I mentioned previously. It's pretty straightforward to install that. But once that plugin is installed, you'll see that it expands the vSphere client operations to allow us to build this infrastructure policy. So this is the vSphere client. You can see the client plugins under the solutions there. And here's our data services manager plugin. And once that has been installed and the appliance rolled out, by selecting the vCenter, you'll see that there's a data services manager view now available. And you can see infrastructure policies, and you can see a bunch of other things related to data services manager there. So what we're going to do is we're just going to build our first infrastructure policy. Well, actually one exists already, but it's our second one. But from a compute perspective, we can select a cluster or we can select resource pools. From a storage policies perspective, you can select any of them here. Again, I'm going with vSAN because that's what I have, but it could be any other policy. I'm going to select a network. I'm going to select an IP pool. You can see the range of IP addresses there that I'm going to consume. I'm going to select a folder. Stick it into the DSM databases one, and then the VM classes. So essentially all the things that I mentioned previously. And that's pretty much it. So now we have an infrastructure policy created, which defines which part of our overall vSphere infrastructure the databases and data services are going to be provisioned onto. So we have a link directly from the vSphere client to take us to data services. And we can assume now maybe that we're logging in as the data admin at this point. And the data admin can also see the infrastructure policies that are being created. They can't actually do anything with them here. They can't create the infrastructure policies. This is a VI admin's role, but they can see all of the components that have been added into the infrastructure policy so that when they come to provision a database or data service, they can actually see what resources they're going to consume. So hopefully that has highlighted the benefits of DSM for a VI admin from a guardrailing perspective, but also from a visibility and management or monitoring perspective as well. So I did also mention that we're fully integrated with the Aria suite. So I just wanted to highlight those again very quickly. So for instance, if I have rolled out a database here, what I can do is I can retrieve the connection string and then I can move on over into my Aria operations, and I can add those database details into my Aria operations once I have the appropriate integration in place. That was the word I was looking for previously. They're now called integrations. So we have integrations for Postgres and we have integrations for MySQL, both of which we support in Data Services Manager. The big change that happened, I guess, going back to last summer now, is that I'll be the first to admit that these integrations were sort of neglected for quite some time, but they have all been revamped very recently over the last 6 months, so that they actually behave quite well now, and have a lot of well, what I feel is really relevant is that the integrations now are also persona focused, so that there is a VI admin persona that gives you a look at the database sort of from an infrastructure perspective. So it shows you the VMs and the ESXi hosts and all of that sort of stuff. But there's also an integration done from a DBA persona perspective. So you get to see a lot of information about how the database itself is operating. So they've done a really nice job on the latest integrations for Aria operations around databases. The formerly log insight, but now the Aria operations for logs, very straightforward. What I'm showing you here is one of the configuration UI options that we have in Data Services Manager. You simply select your provider as Aria operations for logs. On-prem, you give it the IP address of your Aria operations for logs or log insight or whatever. Just save that, and then not just the provider appliance itself, but also the databases start shipping their logging information over to Aria operations for logs. And then from that, you can start building your own dashboards. There is a plan for us to create some dashboards ourselves. We just haven't got around to that yet, but it's actually quite straightforward. And there's a number of blogs out there that you can follow to build up your own dashboards around the different databases and so on. So we can send the logging to Log Insight, as I said, but any third party as well that supports syslog over TCP, UDP, or SSL. So if you're a Splunk user or you're using Elastic, that Elk stack, it's all good. We can ship the logs to those as well. Last but not least, the custom resource I mentioned for Aria automation. So basically, if you're implementing Data Services Manager, just go to the Broadcom support portal to download the various components. There is also an Aria automation component as well. So you download that, it comes as a set of scripts. It's a Python script. You just populate a configuration file, config.json. It's all in the README associated with it there. But once you have the config.json created, and it's nothing more than credentials to DSM and some credentials pointing at where you want to connect to from an Aria automation perspective, we just run the script and it creates everything you need. And from that point on, your service broker within Aria automation, you can make requests from the catalog item that we're after creating to provision databases in DSM. It really is quite straightforward. And this is the service broker, the catalog item. You can see it there, the DSM database as a service. You just click on the request, and then it actually looks very much like building a database directly from the DSM UI or the DSM portal, which we're going to see in the next demo. Again, what's really neat about this is that you can fine tune it to your own environment. So you might have multiple tenants. There might be, I don't know, test and dev type tenants. And in that case, maybe you're not concerned about the replication. You just want to roll out standalone databases. You may not be interested in backing these databases up because they're just going to come and go because they're just test and dev. So all of these things can be tweaked within the catalog item that you see here. But then, of course, for production, you might want everything to be replicated. So what I'm trying to say is that you know, some of the things that you're seeing in this request, you can turn off and turn on, make them available, hide them, whatever the case may be. Just make them very bespoke to your own environments and your own tenants. So that was the Aria side of things. And I want to go through what we're taking care of from the DBA, a data admin perspective. Now, some of the things I highlighted here, I said at the very beginning in the introduction that in many cases, the DBAs in your particular organization, they may be tied up with traditional commercial databases. That might be their full-time role, is just taking care of the oracles, the fleet of oracles that you might have deployed. And now there's a desire to do new modern cloud native type databases, the Postgres's, the MySQLs, maybe the Mongos, all of those kind of things. And perhaps the expertise isn't there, or perhaps they just don't have the time to be dealing with, like I said, the lifecycle management, the patching, the backup and restoring of these modern cloud native databases. So this is something that we have heard loud and clear, and it's something that we think we can help your data admins, your DBAs with through Data Services Manager. So again, recapping, what are the things that we're able to do for the DBAs when it comes to these newer modern cloud native databases? Well, the first thing is around the automated backups. So every database that gets provisioned through DSM, we will automatically set up a backup schedule. And we will take, in the case of Postgres, we will take weekly full backups, we will take daily incremental backups, and we will take copies of what are known as the wall or write ahead logs. I think that's every 5 minutes or every 16 megabytes, whichever threshold we reach first. What it also means is that you can do point in time restores of any of the databases that we backed up. The second thing is around lifecycle management and the updates. We will provide, we're following the Postgres and MySQL release cycle, which is every quarter. They bring out a new patch, and we are aiming to bring out an update every quarter as well. Now, it could be that there's some CVE, there's some critical CVE comes out for Postgres and MySQL. We'll also make that available. That's what we're aiming for, is to follow those guidelines. Now, having said that, you don't want to be going around maybe hundreds of Postgres SQL databases that are being deployed in your infrastructure and having to go through all of those, one at a time. So what we have the ability to do is set a maintenance window across all of your databases that have been provisioned by DSM. Then all you need to do is stage the patch once. And when the maintenance window rolls around, which is by default Saturday night and Sunday morning, we will roll out the patch that has been staged across all of your Postgres databases that have that maintenance schedule set up. If you don't want that to happen, you can simply take your database out of the maintenance schedule and it won't be, the patch won't be applied. But then you would have to manually do it, which is fine. But as I said, the choice is there. But when it comes to fleet management and it comes to dealing with hundreds of databases, you do want some sort of automation around your patching, and that's what we're providing through DSM. We already mentioned the self-service. So yeah, we absolutely, you can continue with a ticket-based approach. Absolutely do that and have a DBA or a data admin provision databases on behalf of consumers. But you may want to give the consumers their own self-service to provision their databases, to take backups, restore backups, all of those kind of things. So that's what we can offer as well. And it all comes under the fleet management aspect. So we have this, the DSM portal or the DSM UI to give you that global view of all of your databases and data services that are deployed, the state of them, the versions of them, are there any patches that are outstanding? All of that stuff is available there through the fleet management view. Okay. So a little bit more about the governance and security. I mean, who is able to get access to these databases? So we have this capability for defining permissions. And as well as that, we have two different roles. We have an admin role and we have a user role. And we've kind of touched on both of those. The admin is somebody, the DBA admin is somebody who comes in and takes care of, setting everything up, configuring everything, and maybe doing the patching and staging and all of that stuff. But from a user perspective, you just want to give them CRUD operations to do create and updates and deletes of databases. We absolutely can offer that as well. Now, we do support LDAP. LDAP integration to the database and also to the appliance actually. So you can define Active Directory users to access the databases as well if you so wish. Also, from the perspective of Postgres, there is this configuration file called pg_hba, and that basically defines what users from which networks are allowed to access which database. So we can give you control of that as well from a security perspective. So you can really tie down the access to the databases. And last but not least, the ability to define custom certificates. So all of that is included as well. And the final point here, custom certificates, is just really there to have secure communication between your end user client and the database itself. So all of that is in place. Just to show you the admin view, you can see there's a whole bunch of things that you would expect an admin to be able to do here, especially from a configuration and settings perspective. And then you have an end user view who can't do very much at all, but they can still do self-service and provision their own databases. So a database creation, what's involved? Well, obviously you're selecting the database engine and what version of the database. We're supporting up to 4 major versions of the databases. So at the moment, be version 16 back to 12 or 13, one of those. Standalone and clustered databases supported, so you can just roll out single VMs, or you can roll out replicated databases as well. And like I mentioned, what we will do is we position each of the replicas of that database on a different ESXi host, just for availability purposes. There's the ability to create a default admin user, or like I said, you can integrate with LDAP as well. The next part then is the infrastructure policy. This is what the VI admin has spent all that time setting up this guardrails so that we don't have databases popping up all over the infrastructure. So next step for the DBA, or the data admin, is to select which infrastructure policy they want to use. Backups enabled by default, and maintenance windows for patching and lifecycle management enabled by default. You can, of course, turn them off if you so wish, but entirely up to you. And then last but not least, we have a section here for database options, and this is really for tweaking the database. I'll show you some, there's an option, these database options, actually, I'll show you some of them when we do the demo next. From a backup schedules and maintenance window perspective, so we do have a requirement on an S3 object store. So this is where we ship our backups to. It's also where we ship our logs to when you request to create a log bundle. So there is a requirement currently to have an object store. And like I said, once that's created for Postgres databases, we're doing full weekly, daily incrementals, and then the write ahead logs are also stored for point in time recoveries. And as I said, there is a default backup window, and you can absolutely change that if you want to make it something different. And then we have the maintenance window as well for the lifecycle management, and it's set to, well, Saturday night, Sunday morning. And so if there's a patch to be rolled out across all of your databases, this is when it will be automatically rolled out. A little bit more about the lifecycle management. What we do is we do highlight in the overview of your databases whether there's an upgrade available. You can see that there. So as I said, if there's an upgrade available and it has been staged, Saturday night, Sunday morning rolls around, and there's a maintenance window set on these databases, it'll be automatically applied. However, you can also apply it manually if you so wish at any point. And you can see it there. So you can just drill into any of those databases and have a look at the upgrade section. And there is an option to upgrade now. If you want to do that, absolutely do that. And also for the provider itself. So it's just to make sure that we're not just focusing on the databases. There may be an update required for the appliance. You can also do that. Again, you could set a maintenance window, Saturday night, Sunday morning, to do that it'll do it automatically when that time rolls around, but you can also do it manually as well. And we have the ability to go back and look at upgrades histories, not just of the databases, but also of the appliance. So you can see when updates were done. And there's one final thing to mention as well, get that here, is that there's no dependency on the data path of the databases to have the provider available. So we can absolutely do an upgrade of the provider appliance, allow that to reboot as part of the upgrade perhaps. That has no impact on any of the databases. So there's a complete separation around the data paths of that. Yes, obviously you won't be able to use the DSM UI to provision new databases, or monitor the databases that are currently running while the appliance is, or the provider appliance is unavailable. But as for the operational aspect of those databases, that's absolutely fine. There's no issue there. A little bit more then about the monitoring, alerting, and troubleshooting that we have. Like I said, we're bubbling things up not just into the DSM UI, but we're also bubbling them up into the vSphere client. So anything I'm showing you here, you should be able to see on the vSphere client as well. And we think that gives the vSphere administrator and the DBA a good opportunity to have, one-to-one intelligent conversations about, we're talking about this database, well, this database are these VMs, and these VMs are running on this infrastructure. So it really helps for that conversation when it comes to, resource management, maybe future planning, all of that good stuff. So we do try to give some detailed alerts as well, so you can drill down into any of the warnings under the monitoring tab of the database, and it gives you a little bit more information about what's going on, and we try and give you some troubleshooting tips as well. We also have database metrics. We saw some of those bubbled up into the vSphere client too. We think these are probably the metrics that are of most interest to a DBA, so throughput on the database, deadlocks and conflicts and commits and rollbacks. And I'm far from being a DBA, but allegedly this is interesting to DBAs. So we're always open to suggestions. So if there's something more interesting we should be putting here, we're all ears. Okay, so let's have a look at our next demo. So this is where we left off. We were just looking at the infrastructure policy in the DSM UI, and that's all in place now. And we have lots of databases coming and going. So it looks like a type of test and dev environment here. We're going to roll out a new database. It's going to be Postgres. Going to pick one of these engine versions, 16.4, give it a name. In this particular case, it's going to be maybe production. So I'm going to have it replicated. The database name and the instance name actually match up. In this case, I don't have any LDAP integration, so I'm just going to use a PG admin as the admin username. And now we're down into the infrastructure policy. So that's the one I just created. I had a number of storage policies, so I'm just going to pick one of those. And I had a number of VM classes. I'm just going to pick one of those as well. So that looks good. I might bump up the disk size as well. It's going to maybe be a little bigger than the default 60. My backup location is predefined and my backup schedule. Yeah, so I'm automatically going to start shipping backups to my object store called database backup. I'm going to leave the maintenance window because I'd like this thing to be automatically updated. And now because I also want this to be monitored by Aria operations, Aria operations tells me that I should turn on a few more metrics on the database, and that would mean that Aria operations is able to monitor it with a little bit more detailed information there as well. So slightly tweak some of those parameters, and that looks good. And we can review everything and create the database. So it usually takes a few minutes, but we'll speed things along in the interest of time. And there we go. My new database is okay and ready. I have lots of information that I can view about the database here, all of the details I put in place. I see the relationship between nodes and virtual machines. I see the infrastructure policy settings that I chose. I see the maintenance window details here. I even see my options that I set on the database. Monitoring tab, kind of touched on this. No alerts, that's good. But some metrics that we think are interesting. Backup is running. I can generate a log bundle, and I can audit all of the operations that are taking place on the database. So last but not least, I'll just send this connection string now off to my end user, tell them, yeah, the database is up and running, go knock yourself out, connect to the database and do some database stuff. It's as simple as that. So that's, I see I've gone into the dark a little bit. It's kind of, yeah. So that's essentially how simple it is to build a database. So we've seen now the infrastructure policy that was created by the VI admin to say the data services are going to be provisioned onto this infrastructure. The data admin in this particular case has used the UI to create a database. They could just have simply have created a YAML manifest and used the Kubernetes API to build this database, or they could even have used Aria automation to do the same thing like we talked about. And then we've seen the end user. In this particular case, DBA is taking responsibility for providing the connection string to the end user. End user is able to connect to the database. But like I said, we could have a self-service approach where the end user is also provisioning the databases and connecting to them themselves. So either approach will work. So let's talk about that app team, the end user or the consumers of the databases now to close. This is our third persona. So I mentioned now that we have a full-blown API. It's Kubernetes-based API. What that means is that you would create a YAML manifest. YAML is just short for yet another markup language. You would define all of the things that we saw when I created through the UI. So my database version, my engine version. Did I want the topology to be standalone? Did I want the topology to be replicated? Did I want to have automated backups in place? Did I want to have automated lifecycle management in place? All of those things would get defined in the YAML manifest, and the app team would just use a kubectl command. That's your CLI for interfacing to a Kubernetes API server, create the database, and then just consume the database that way as well. So instead, if you do have a team of developers and they need to provision databases, they probably don't want to go into the UI and do click, 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 click. They want to describe this in a YAML manifest and use a single API call through kubectl to build a database for them, and then just retrieve the connection string and off they go. We can absolutely do that with Data Services Manager. Now, there's another approach as well, and this is where we have a consumption operator for our DSM. So our DSM stood up as before. VI admin has built infrastructure policies. It's all ready to go. But this time, rather than connecting directly to DSM, you may have an external Kubernetes cluster somewhere. Your developers might be working on their own flavor of Kubernetes. Third-party Kubernetes could be bare metal on Linux, or it could be even our own Tanzu version of Kubernetes somewhere. And perhaps they don't have storage capacity to build databases on this cluster. So maybe it's just running on some local hosts with no additional storage. So then how do they build a database that they require for their testing? Well, they can absolutely integrate through the consumption operator with DSM and provision databases that way. So the consumption operator gets installed. Part of the consumption operator is this thing called the binding namespace, which essentially says this user can use this infrastructure policy to provision a database on DSM, and they can use this backup location and so on and so forth. That's what goes into the binding namespace. We're basically telling these users of this Kubernetes cluster that they can gain access to DSM to build out databases. And then all they do is make an API call to DSM, get the connection string back. Lo and behold, they have access to a database. So they can continue developing on their remote Kubernetes cluster, but consume a database that has been provisioned for them on DSM. And you have all the guardrails, you have all the bells and whistles, you have all the automated lifecycle management and automated backups, and all of the stuff that I talked about that's available in DSM now available to them as well for their databases. So this is something that's also resonating with a lot of our customers who are using or who have development teams. Um, so yeah. So to close, I did want to talk about some upcoming features that we have planned. Yeah, we're moving fairly swiftly on various updates and version and features to DSM. And what we have planned very soon is a new release which has these features included. Now, to date, our lifecycle management and patching of databases is for minor version upgrades only. So for instance, for Postgres, you might be able to go from Postgres 15.1 to 15.2. What we're planning in the next release is to allow you to go from Postgres version 15 to Postgres version 16, for example. Similarly, item 2 there, today when we provision a database and we request it to be replicated, it is replicated within the same vSphere cluster. Yes, it's on different ESXi hosts, but it is on the same vSphere cluster. What we will have in the next release is the ability to provision databases across different vSphere clusters. Now, they would still be managed by the same vCenter server because there's a one-to-one relationship between your data services manager and your vCenter. But if your vCenter is managing multiple vSphere clusters, we can absolutely roll out a replicated database, putting components on different vSphere clusters. Point 3, something I didn't really touch on, but once you have a database deployed, you can actually scale it up. So maybe the VM class that you defined with the compute and memory is not meeting your needs. You can absolutely scale that up and have a larger VM class with more compute and more memory associated with the database. But perhaps that's only, it might be like one of these Black Friday type events where you need to scale up. And now Black Friday has gone past and these resources are now stranded. Well, in the next release, we will allow you to scale those VM classes back down. 4 is very interesting. 4 is that if you have multiple DSM deployments in your infrastructure, you will be able to replicate databases between different DSM deployments. So different vSphere infrastructures, you could have a cluster database deployed on, say, site A and replicating over to site B. And then you have a catastrophic event on site A. You need to fail everything over to site B. What you can do is you can promote the instance that you have over on site B to become your primary. And in fact, you can start replicating it there as well, if you so wish. So it's basically DR for your databases that are being provisioned with DSM. 5 is something a number of customers asked us for, is that when we delete a database, sort of have it in a bin or a trash can type approach, so that, oh, I made a mistake, I didn't need to delete that database, can I recover it? So we are implementing that in the next release as well. So we have, I think it's a 30-day grace period base. You'll be able to recover that database before it's completely destroyed. And last but not least, I did mention this partnership at the beginning with our friends at MinIO to provide an object storage service through DSM on VCF as well. So those are the big ticket items. There's a few more things there as well, but hopefully we'll be able to talk more about those very shortly. So keep a watch out for some blogs and things around that. So next steps. I do blog a lot about DSM, and you'll find everything so far that I've written on cormachogan.com/DSM. We also have a hands-on lab. So if you'd like to get more hands-on experience, have a look at that URL there. You don't have to worry about taking down these. We're going to share the slides with you anyway. And last but not least, we do offer a sort of white glove approach to customers who are interested in POCing or doing a proof of concept of DSM in their environments today. So just sign up for the free evaluation there if you'd be interested in having some assistance to get DSM stood up. And again, it does while it does require you to have a VSM license, a VCF license, it doesn't actually require you to have VCF. So even if you have a VCF license and you're not yet migrated into VCF, we can stand up DSM on a vSphere environment just for a proof of concept and to show you everything that we have gone through in the past hour around DSM. So if you're interested in any of those, yeah, the links and the QR codes, they're all there. Yeah, so I think that might be it from me. I will ask Thomas if there is anything. Looks like he's been answering the questions.
There were just
But is
two
there any?
questions.
Okay.
I think they are worth to mention. I mean, from DSM and the VCF license, DSM is part of VCF. It's a core component, and as of today, you can use it. As soon as you have the VCF license, DSM is part of it. You can install it. You have no limitations in resources or how many databases you deploy. So you're free to use it. Only one thing to mention, VMware by Broadcom also offering database support. So if you wish to have your developers can call someone to get support for Postgres itself, you can purchase that separately, but that's optional today.
And I noticed there's a second question about, yeah, I'm worried about your voice giving way. But yeah, I see Scott asking about SQL Server. So certainly SQL Server, Scott, we're very interested in that. And at the moment, we're scoping that out. So we're having a number of conversations. I know Thomas has replied the exact same thing, but we're having a number of conversations with different customers. If you would like to talk to us about what you would expect DSM to offer from a Microsoft SQL Server perspective, we'd love to have a conversation with you. We're sort of in two camps on that. One is, do we do the whole black box approach like we're doing for Postgres and MySQL? And we stand up a Kubernetes cluster, we roll out SQL Server as a set of containers, just like you would do for SQL Server in Azure, for example. Or do we go a different approach and we stand up a bunch of VMs that are running Windows OS and running the standard SQL Server type applications we have today? So there's sort of two trains of thought, and what we're looking to do is have conversations with customers to see, which is the best way to approach it. So if you're interested in talking to our product managers and engineering teams about what you would like to see DSM do from a SQL Server perspective, and actually that goes for all of the attendees, feel free to reach out to your TAM and they can reach out to us and we can have that conversation. So yeah, thank you for that. So that's it, Andy. I'll
Excellent.
let you sign off.
Yeah, thanks so much for helping us understand these benefits and features of DSM, Cormac, and for the various personas. That was helpful to look at it through those different eyes. And Thomas, thanks for hanging with us today, again, despite not feeling great, and for taking care of the questions in the background. We appreciate that a ton. As I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, it was recorded, and your TAM will be able to make the link available to you here shortly. And please do join us next month, February 6th, where we'll be looking more at the VMware Avi load balancer. All right, with that, have a great 2025.